Now on RT, one renowned journalist and broadcaster, Cathal Ó Shannon, speaks frankly about his life and work and that landmark encounter with Muhammad Ali.
He's probably one of the great television journalists, possibly Ireland's greatest television journalist.
Drew his revolver and fired point blank at Lieutenant Bove. And at this stage, all hell broke loose.
Official Ireland seemed to give a greater welcome to Nazis and former collaborators than they did to returning war veterans.
Cathal Ó Shannon loves people. He has an innate curiosity.
Joe Fraser's ugly, he's flat-footed, he can't talk, he can't sing, he can't fight.
Always had a sense of rascality about him.
Why do you think he beat you, Muhammad, then the last time?
For anybody to come across smiling, to join the Tonight team, God, it's like being canonised.
Award to presenter-interviewer Cathal Ó Shannon for the informed and sympathetic interviewing that contributed so much to the production.
He's great fun and he's bold, so bold is attractive.
He seems to see things in his mind as he tells the story. And of course, over the passage of time, they become more and more embellished.
There were about 5 people on the campus in Montrose who were universally loved by everybody. I hasten to say I was not one of those people. They always had, first of all, the latest, most outrageous story about somebody or other. Scandal, gossip. It was a question of stirring the pot.
It was on pure devilment on his part.
Some stories he's repeated to me over the last 40 years, and they're infinitely better now than they were 40 years ago.
Nothing frightened him. No threats of libel actions, no politician outraged about what he had written.
You feel that he's delighted he's with you, and you sit back and you listen to his amazing stories, and he flatters you and he's fun, and you feel great.
I have always delighted in the company of ladies. There would be people who would say, "Oh, Shannon, in your day you were a girl chaser." I would, of course, deny that.
To our darling friend and colleague and his recent birthday, Cathal Ó Shannon.
I wanted to be a journalist from the time I was a child. And for some reason or other, I always accepted that I would be a journalist. It was a wonderful community. Of course, growing up to the age of 10 or thereabouts, Casino Road and Marino was our world. I mean, we didn't really know anywhere else. That's the house I was born in, 41 Casino Road in 1928. This was a working class district. My father was a trade union official. The Osbornes who lived there, he was a shop assistant. Opposite there, the Walshes, Mr. Walsh was a cooper in Guinness's. Every household had children, so you knew kids on both sides you can across the street. We got up to devilment, of course. We robbed orchards. We knocked off stuff in Woolworths. That was common enough among children in my day. I became an altar boy here in this church, the Church of St. Vincent de Paul. Not because I was very religious, but because my 3 next-door neighbours, the Osborne boys, were all altar boys. And they wore these lovely red soutanes and white surplices, and I wanted to wear exactly the same. I was sort of religious in that guilty Catholic sort of way. No wonder, I suppose, because I was educated at the Christian Brothers in Griffith Avenue. I can recall on my first day hearing the howls of a boy being beaten. I can hear the sound of the leather to this day. My father had come down from Belfast for the Rising of 1916. He was an official in the Irish Transport and General Workers Union. a close associate of James Connolly.
I asked Connolly, is there anything doing yet? To see there is. The date is fixed. So I asked him, when is it? I can't tell you, he says. 5 others and myself are sworn to secrecy.
After the failure of the rising, he was on a hop, skip and jump on his way back to Belfast, and he was arrested on his somewhere around about Balbriggan and jailed. I grew up revering the names of the patriot dead of 1916. My father had known them all. Later he became deputy leader of the Labour Party, and he served as a TD in the second Dáil in 1922. In the 1930s, times were much harder for everybody than they are now. I mean, my father, his pay in the 1930s, he worked for the Transport Union, was 4 guineas a week. That wasn't a lot of money on which to bring up 3 children. So my father would review books for the Irish Times. And no sooner had he finished with the books than I can remember my mother would get them and we would go to Green's and sell them. So we were great readers in our house. My parents were always thought to be rather unconventional because they were artistically inclined. And among their friends would have been artists and actors. Yes, they were bohemian.
Carl was always different because he went to elocution lessons. Now, I was supposed to go with him, but I just survived one day, and in your mind in those days, that was for sissies. It was like learning dancing, you know. But he learned to speak, and learned to speak beautifully.
I was a young teenager in the beginning of the 1940s when the Second World War was on. Dev, of course, had decided that Ireland would be neutral. During the Blitz, London was bombed on 57 consecutive nights. We were conscious of what was happening in Britain, the bombing, for instance. We grew up, boys like me grew up, watching the Royal Air Force fighting the Germans. And the Royal Air Force seemed very romantic. And myself and Fred O'Donovan and a number of others wanted to join the Royal Air Force and become flyers. We wanted to fly in aeroplanes. I must say that I joined it for the colour of the uniform and the idea that I'd be flying Spitfires and Lancasters. So Fred O'Donovan and myself were 16 years of age. You weren't supposed to join the Air Force till you were 17 or 18 years of age, but we got our baptismal certificates and we got ink eradicator and we changed the date of our births. I was trained on Lancaster bombers, and the life expectancy for rear gunners at the height of the war in Europe was 5 operations. I was sent to Southeast Asia, to Burma. Fortunately for me, I arrived there towards the end of the war, so I didn't see any action, really. So I spent 2.5, 3 years in the Air Force. Looking back on it now, we had a great time. There was no war, there was no danger. We were well fed. I had always had the inclination towards journalism, and in the Royal Air Force I was able to put it into practice. There was a couple of services newspapers, daily newspapers, for which I wrote articles and events, mainly invented things for them. But that was my start in journalism. So when I came back to Ireland, I was able to say with a certain element of doubtful truth that I had already done some journalism. So I got a job as a cadet reporter on the Irish Times under the legendary editor R.M. Smiley. The abiding memory I have of the Irish Times is the smell of printer's ink and the clatter of printing machines, linotypes. I would be sent out with other reporters who were covering the courts and accidents and so on, and that was the way you learned how to be a news reporter. I have to say that pubs and drinking played a significant role in a newspaper man's routine. The Palace Bar was a favourite watering hole for Irish Times people. These are some of the photographs of the old-time regulars here, people like Bertie Smiley, Lynn Doyle, my father, of course, Miles Nagopoline, Liam Redmond. Gosh, faces from the past, so many of them. Smiley could write very well, with great style. He had a sure and certain eye to pick out people who were good. I say that because he picked me out. This actually was Smiley's corner in the Palace Bar. Smiley not only changed the Irish Times when he was editor from being a strong unionist Protestant newspaper to being a very good Irish daily newspaper. But I have to admit that he and many of his colleagues and other reporters in the Irish Times spent a lot of time here in the Palace Bar. And if you wanted to see somebody from the Irish Times about getting something into the paper, you didn't go to the office. The chances are you would find them all in here. So Smiley held court in here in the old days.
I'd been teaching for 8 years, and I couldn't believe it when I joined the Irish Times, because all the things that were absolutely forbidden at school, like having a little drink at lunchtime or having a cigarette anywhere, were positively encouraged in the Irish Times of those days. The place was thick with cigarette smoke, and this to me was like having died and gone to heaven. I couldn't believe it.
I was 21 when I was assigned to the London desk of the Irish Times. It was just after the war. There was still rationing. And the city had been devastated by the bombing, particularly around St. Paul's on Fleet Street. It was a very exciting time for me. This is Fleet Street, in the heart of the city of London. And for generations, this was the very centre of journalism all over Europe. The Daily Telegraph had a building here, the old Daily Express, the Daily Mail, all now, alas, moved to different locations. And if you made it to Fleet Street, you were really making it in journalism. And the Irish Times had an office here, and I came to it in 1949. It was 2 windows just up there. The London letter of the Irish Times filled a column, and that was really all we had to do in a day's work, to fill that column. So you went to press conferences, you wrote about things that were happening. During my time in London, I covered the Queen's coronation, Winston Churchill's funeral, and the Festival of Britain. So I had a great time in London. And I met my wife there. My wife was a Londoner. I had a friend who I'd been in the Air Force with, and he worked in Reuters news agency, and he had a sister. And they had recently been to a party where they'd taken a lot of photographs of the people who were there, and they showed me. I said, God, that's a smashing looking bird. And it was Patsy Jane Dyke, who I then met. I met her, I will never forget it. I spoke to her on the telephone, and she agreed to meet me. She worked in Country Life magazine. So I said I would meet her outside Cook's travel agency in the Strand. And I thought I was very chilly. I'd got my de mob suit on, pinstripe suit and so on. But I also had a sweater, rather like this one, but I wore it backwards because that was the fashionable thing to do, so that the top came right across here like that. And she said to me years later, you know, she said, as soon as I saw that, I nearly turned away. I thought, here's a fellow with his jacket, with his jersey on back to front. He's a feckin' idiot. just all of the while, with me feeling awfully lonesome and blue. I sigh and I cry, I know I would die if anything happened to you. I asked my friend Tony Kelly, a fellow reporter, to be my best man.
Do you remember the incident when you were getting married in London and we were waiting on Patsy to come down the aisle?
Yeah.
And with that, a mouse came out onto
the altar. I remember that.
And sat up on its hind legs and started washing itself. And you said, geez, if Patsy sees this, there'll be no so-and-so wedding.
Well, yeah, how right you are, I remember. Would you ever forget it? Christchurch.
That's right.
Just off the Strand. That was gas, there's no doubt about it. Patsy had known some Irishmen before she met me. What Irishmen had she known? Fellas who cleaned the windows in Country Life magazine. They were the Irishmen she had met before, and I was the only Irishman she met that wasn't a window cleaner. This is Corpus Christi Church in Maiden Lane, where I was married 53 years ago. We had a reception not too far away, and then went off to Paris. So I'll go in and say a prayer for Patsy.
I think you could easily make the mistake that because Cathal is such a strong personality, that it might have been an unequal relationship. But it wasn't, because Patsy was an extraordinary woman. And theirs was an amazing partnership. And without Patsy, Cathal wouldn't be the man he is at all.
She shared with Cathal a great sort of cynical, impressed by nothing attitude, which is always very refreshing.
Well, Patsy and I came straight back after our honeymoon to live in Ireland. Patsy decided that she would work here in Dublin. She was very much a Londoner, and Dublin struck her as being rather odd and old-fashioned. But she integrated extremely well with the Irish and became an O'Shannon. My mother was ill in hospital on one occasion when I had just got married. And she called me in one day and she said, I've written a letter which I want you to read. And I said, okay. And I went out and I read the letter. And in the letter, she explained to me that she and my father had never married. Never knew. Never knew. Never knew. None of us knew. I went to my father's house, having read this letter. I can see it to this day. He was sitting on a couch, and I said to him, Dad, you know why Mum is ill? And he said, well, I said, well, she's very distressed because you never got married. He went grey. Absolutely grey. I thought he was going to collapse. They did afterwards get married. My wife, Patsy, was the only one at the wedding. She got a priest to come along, and my father married my mother in her hospital bed. Yeah. In 1960, I was still with the Irish Times. The Congo was given its freedom. It had been a Belgian colony. Immediately, within a matter of weeks, civil war had broken out, and the Congolese were beginning to slaughter the Belgians. And an Irish contingent, the first Irish soldiers sent abroad, were sent to the Congo, and I went out with the advance party. One naturally had a certain nervousness about going out, but we were, after all, with armed Irish troops. There were 9 Irish soldiers killed there in operations. Lieutenant Colonel Paddy Liddy subsequently did an inquiry into it, and whereas we knew that 9 Irishmen had been killed, we did not know that the Irish had killed 37 Congolese in that exchange of fire.
It's astounding how broad and wide his brief is, and how authoritative he is on everything. He's the man who taught me a very important little truth in life, that you should always take your work seriously, but never yourself seriously. And he took his work, whatever he was doing, very seriously.
On New Year's Eve 1961, RTE television was launched.
Ladies and gentlemen, both here in the Gresham and Eamon Andrews doing that wonderful outside broadcast on the first night of RTE, when if one plug had just fallen out of a socket, the whole thing would have fallen apart. These are the last moments of the first day of television. It was the most ambitious, plucky piece of television ever done, because nobody had done anything like that before.
There was a program called Broadsheet, which was a magazine program of short interviews, and they needed reporters to do the questioning. And that's how I got into television. I'd been in RTE for some time. The BBC had come over, Alan Wicker had come over to do a number of programmes in Ireland for the Old Tonight programme. And the director-in-chief of the Tonight programme was a man called Derek Amor, with whom I became very friendly. And I said to him, "What are the chances of a job?" "Yes." So I got a 2-year contract with the BBC, just like that.
You make it sound so easy.
With the BBC, I went to Africa, I went to America, I went all over the place with it. I had a great time. The BBC did something which RTE didn't do in its early days. When you were a reporter or a presenter, you were directed. The director was the one who called the shots.
They say that you get a lovely view of Camberwell from the top.
Whereas in RTE, the presenter was, "I'm the gaffer here, mate. This is the way it's going to go." That was, but not in the BBC. The BBC was entirely director disciplined.
He was one of the very first to make the transition from Ireland to Britain. And it was a fantastic thing to do.
Isn't there a phrase somewhere? It's as easy as falling off a chimney.
Suddenly, here was Cathal Óg, with that Dublin accent, you know, this sprite-like creature, suddenly appears with Cliff Mitchell-Moore and all these other great, almost godlike people who've achieved an iconic status in Britain ever since.
And I can tell you that there's plenty of room at the top up there for you, but not for me.
Except Cathal Ó Shannon.
It only lasted for about 6 or 8 months because the programme was axed in one of the many political rows within the BBC. So I left the BBC at that stage and came back to Ireland.
10 seconds to wear a quiet studio now, please.
Tonight's programme is your TV station.
Ireland in the 60s was on the cusp of a transformation from this very black and white kind of monochrome Ireland, and certainly RTE was a major contributing factor. We had our own television station, we had our own stars, and to work there was really to feel that you were at an exciting place, an exciting crossroads, a creative crossroads in Ireland.
When I came back to from the BBC, I joined RTE and I joined Newsbeat. Newsbeat was the same sort of programme. It was a mixture of studio and film.
When I was working with him on Newsbeat, we used to do these quirky, odd things that he'd come up with.
How do you like the idea of tinkers coming to live next door to you, Mrs. Coburn?
I don't like it at all, sir.
It was always an occasion for these small towns in the early days when a television crew arrived. In those days, they welcomed you with open arms.
If you went on the road as part of an RTE OB or film crew, it was like you were a rock and roll band. It was like the circus came to town. So that had its side effects and benefits, which were very good for young men at that time.
It was pretty relentless because they had to turn in 2 stories a week with all that entails, which is the research, the shooting, the editing, the voiceover, all of that. So they were pretty well on the road like all the time.
Up here in the border counties, cockfighting begins on Easter Monday and it'll go on till the 12th of July. Of course, it's all highly illegal.
During the last war, I found myself stationed near Loch Ness.
4 years ago, when Captain Leslie first came to look for lake monsters in Ireland, his equipment was pretty primitive. It consisted mainly of tin cans full of stones strung out across a lake and the fervent hope that a swimming monster would bang into them.
characteristic I noticed about all of them. They were within decent distance of a good restaurant.
We may yet hear more of the fairy tree of Ballantrae. Good night.
This was the one thing.
I remember very well one occasion in 1971, the end of March in Galway, and the story we were working on just fell down. And we decided that we would create something for April Fool's Day, which was coming up the following week.
And I came up with the idea that we would do a spoof about a woman called Margaret Kildysart, an Irish novelist.
But she wrote, which delighted him, erotic literature.
Muggerley Hall, Loughrea, in the County Galway, 1971, or at least all that remains of it. This was once the home of Margaret Kildysart, but there are few people in the town of Loughrea, or indeed in the surrounding countryside, who today remember even her name.
Various characters were brought on board. I interviewed a friend of mine, Michael Deany, said that she won the Irish Independent Award for the tallest lady novelist of 1917. She was huge, apparently.
Her strange life and rather mysterious death are not spoken of any more here in Loughrea. There's no monument to her here in the town which she immortalised in such novels as Do Anna Deco.
When I was naming some of the books she wrote, I said that one of them was called Do Anna Deco. Anybody who had been in the British forces and had been in India knew that Do Anna Deco was Urdu for tuppence a look, which is what you said to prostitutes, Do Anna Deco.
One of the contributors to Margaret Kildysart was John B. Keane, and he really entered into the spirit of things.
I hate to be the author of a sweeping statement, but I would honestly say that she is possibly the best female dramatist ever to come out of this country. And
it went down very well. It fooled a lot of people. In fact, one of the evening papers actually did a review of it, thinking that it was real. And of course it wasn't. It was nonsense. So that was great gas.
There's no man in the world, I think, whose name is more synonymous with sport today. He says he's the greatest, and he says he's the prettiest. Ladies and gentlemen, will you welcome, please, Muhammad Ali.
In August 1969, our government contemplated invading the north.
The Irish government can no longer stand by.
To some people, this amounted to a declaration of war.
It was a totally irresponsible speech in the circumstances.
But what would have happened if the Irish army had crossed the border?
The seizure of a town in Northern Ireland close to the border.
If they'd taken on British troops, the answer is an awful lot of them would have got killed.
If Lynch had invaded, Tuesday at 9:35 on RTE1.
Let's roll! Come out with your hands up!
Hello, Margaret.
Snake-eggins!
Roger that. So, let's go through this new script.
I love brainstorming.
It's not brainstorming, it's the script.
Yeah, the script.
Get your own personal speedy internet with Meteor Broadband to go. Just pop it in your pocket, and you're good to go.
Forget the socket. It's the internet in your pocket.
I actually can't do this anymore.
Wow, this business just eats people up.
I think it's best if I'm home now.
Meteor Broadband to go. Available on pay-as-you-go and bill pay. Have you got a jet?
With an EBS 5-month fixed savings account, you can watch your savings grow and bloom because EBS pays a bumper 3.75% gross per annum so that you get the most from your savings. Join Ireland's biggest family of almost 500,000 members. Drop into your local EBS during National Savings Week, 7th to the 12th of September.
When Tom came home from school with a letter, I was horrified. I mean, head lice. Who needs them? But a friend told me there's a perfect solution. Full Mark Solution. It's a 10-minute treatment that's clinically proven to kill head lice. No nasty smells and no traditional pesticides. It works by coating lice in a solution that makes them dehydrate and die. Couldn't be simpler. Or quicker. So it gets full marks from me. Full marks for Full Marks Solution.
I've just found my ancestors on the computer. I've just booked a flight to Paris on the internet.
Transition year students invite older people to come to their schools to find out how to use a computer to do more of the things you want. It's free, one-on-one, so you go at your own pace, and you never know, you might teach them a thing or two. For more information on the Log On Learn initiative and how it could help you do more, just call 01 214 7417.
A Garnier innovation.
Eyes age in two ways, wrinkles and bags. Now I take double action.
Garnier Ultra Lift Pro X Double Action Eye. 1. The cream reduces the appearance of even deep wrinkles. 2. The refreshing gel targets bags.
Double action, double benefit. Garnier, great innovations, great prices. Take care.
Garnier.
Welcome to RTE Radio 1's Drive Time, where Mary Wilson teases out the daily topics.
Gosh, that's a very positive start to things.
The news as it happens.
It's 5 o'clock. Elections, the oil debates, but the images of the week, children's shoes and a silent march that spoke volumes.
Brings us the latest sport.
Des, you're hearing me loud and clear there. Okay, what's happening?
All the news, sport and current affairs, the minute it happens. Drive Time with Mary Wilson on RTE Radio 1.
Join us after this.
J.D. Quench is back, like you've never seen him before, in the return of J.D. Quench again. The Thirst Gang are still making the city sizzle.
We got a very sticky situation over on Parched Avenue.
I'm on it, Chief. But J.D.'s ready for more action, more danger, more ladies.
I need some cooling down, baby.
And more squirting. The return of J.D. Quench again. Who says deja vu never strikes twice? Thirst never wins.
At National College of Ireland, we believe everyone has potential, but potential is nothing unless it's realised. With the right environment and support, you can realise yours. Find out how with our part-time certificate, degree and postgraduate courses. Check out ncirl.ie or call 1850 221 721.
At SuperValue, we've always got great bargains, quality and choice, and genuine low prices.
Like buy SuperValue quality Irish diced beef 454 gram and get SuperValue carrots and SuperValue baby potatoes free. And get better than half price savings on Turnstone wines.
That's value, the SuperValue way.
In the summer of 1972, Muhammad Ali came to Dublin to fight Al Blue Lewis in Croke Park.
Well, do you think he is the prettiest?
I was in RTE when Cathal O'Shannon did that now famous interview with Muhammad Ali. I wasn't working on the show, but there was great frisson of excitement around the station.
We paid him £100 for that interview. 3 months beforehand, he'd done one for the BBC, and they had paid him £14,000. But he did it for us for £100. How John Condon persuaded him to do that, I don't know.
See, in America, the black people were always taught to be humble. You know, yes, boss. And never has a slave got up and said, I am the greatest. I'm beautiful. I cannot lose. They said, that nigger talks too much. The nigger needs a good whooping, and they pay money to see me beat. And I go to the bank laughing, 100,000.
I negotiated the money in the Shelburne Hotel at about 7:30 in the morning, one morning, on a hiding to nothing because I had £100. They said, £100? Yeah, £100, that's it. But I said I could guarantee, and I could no more guarantee, that the controller was the person who guaranteed whether the show went out the night before the fight, and therefore fill Croke Park. So he said, okay, £100 out. Cash.
Do you ever get into the ring hating the man you're
No, never.
Just before the interview, a man from accounts came over with an envelope with £100 in it and says, there's your £100, sign for it. So I signed for it, Julie, handed it to Angelo Dundee. He signed for the £100, put it in his pocket, and the show went on.
Do you get in with anxiety or fear?
I'm nervous because of the talking that I do, and I have to back it up. I think about people. I'm on a hell of a spot. I'm on a heck of a spot. Can you imagine Blue Lewis whooping me? I couldn't go back to America.
I was lucky enough to be able to stand in the background in the darkened studio and watch Cathal from the safety of that darkness. And it was a master craftsman at work. I mean, he seduced Muhammad Ali with his questions, with his charm.
But the things I'm telling you now, I won't tell in America on television because they'll start liking me. They say, oh, he's just tricking us. But when I get back to America, I'll be bad.
He was always very well prepared. I mean, he knew as much about the subject as the subject knew about themselves. It was a wonderful interview, and I think it stands up to this day.
You appear when you're fighting.
I do.
Quite often.
I do.
To talk.
I talk.
What are you saying, or can you repeat that?
Well, some of them I won't repeat, but I have a few things to say to, not for the public, but to confuse my opponent. Like I might say to a white fighter, listen, while I'm in the clinch, the Black Panther's outside. You don't stand a damn chance tonight, boy.
A most entertaining man to talk to, and he did a most peculiar thing. He said to me, I'm a magician, I can do magic. And he said, have you got a packet of cigarettes? And I gave him the cigarette packet, and he tore off a strip of silver paper, put it into his mouth, and then said, give me a hand, and put it on my hand like this.
And I can say, you just watch me and you concentrate. That paper's gonna get warm. So warm until it'll start smoking. And that paper will keep on till it gets hot. Do you feel it?
What do I feel?
And it burned me. Smoke rose up from it. And people said to me afterwards, of course, absolute nonsense. You were just doing that for effect.
Just take your hand and hold this, quick before it cools off. Is that hot?
It's quite hot. I'm not fooling. I'm not fooling.
Is it hot? Yeah. Is it hot? Yeah. Okay.
He's a wizard. Thank you.
Now, how he did it, I don't know. To this day, I don't know. But I know that for months afterwards, I had a mark on my hand where it burnt me. So that was the magic Muhammad Ali. Even the Olives Are Bleeding was a film I made about Irishmen who'd fought on both sides in the Spanish Civil War. I had grown up knowing people, friends of my father's and mother's, who had fought on the Republican side in the Spanish Civil War, the Labour side or the Communist side.
For the whole of Europe and in Ireland too, the Spanish Civil War was a war of fierce passions. Democracy was under attack by a rebellious army aided by the fascist powers, or the church was being crushed by the forces of Antichrist.
I was fascinated by the Spanish Civil War ever since I was 10 years of age in 1938. Some Republicans came over to visit Ireland. My father took me to meet them in a place in Stephen's Green. Irishmen fought on both sides, and I knew some of them.
Matt Doolan, today a sales representative in his native Cork. In 1936, a corporal with O'Duffy's brigade in Spain.
Matt Doolan, great fascist in his day.
But you considered yourself then, and you obviously do now, as a very good Catholic, I presume.
A sound, let us say a sound Christian. Basically a sound Christian.
Yeah, well, was it...
Practicing Catholic.
All right, was it Christianity or Catholicism that brought you to Spain?
Christianity.
I think with Even the Olives Are Bleeding, what Cathal brought to that, more than anything else, was his absolute passion for the period, his interest in the people who went and why they went, on both sides.
I decided to go to Spain because I saw the Spanish struggle as a continuation of the struggle here.
Michael O'Riordan, Secretary of the Communist Party of Ireland.
It was a war of the rich against the poor, a brutal war of the rich against the poor.
All men of great conviction, on whichever side they were, and who went to sacrifice their lives for their beliefs.
The honour was on our side. I think that we were fighting for Christianity and they were fighting for the disestablishment of the Catholic Church.
It goes back to his own interest in people, in the human story. What makes a man go to war to fight for an ideology or for a faith? He was on a quest.
Well, all causes are worldwide anyway. Freedom is indivisible, isn't it? And if a man fights for freedom in one place, he's fighting for it everywhere.
Regretfully, I'm afraid they're all dead now. There isn't a single Irish survivor left of the Spanish Civil War.
He just he shone, actually, in some of the pieces to camera. He just came at you out of the screen and brought it alive, which is his huge talent, to be able to bring something alive for viewers.
An olive grove in the Jarama Valley south of Madrid. Nearly 40 years ago, two great armies fought over this ground, and in 10 days of vicious and bloody fighting, 45,000 of them were killed, including 22 Irishmen. One of them was Charlie Donnelly, the young Armagh poet. He and his section had run for cover into an olive grove, and Donnelly bent down and picked up a bunch of olives. He squeezed them and said, "Even the olives are bleeding." A minute later, a bullet hit him in the head, and he's buried now beneath those olive trees.
For his work as a television reporter, in particular for the skillful blend of commentary and interview in the programme commemorating the Spanish Civil War, Even the Olives Are Bleeding, Cathal O'Shannon.
I invited them all in to a viewing before it went out on, and we were all sitting in the same room, about 8 or 9 of us. One of them said, you show a bias towards the socialists, and a row started out between them inside in the room. It nearly came to blows.
I'm really proud to have worked on that programme. I've often said that of 40 years in the business, it's the thing I'm proudest of.
Emmett Dalton was a fascinating character. He'd been Michael Collins's right-hand man in 1922.
7:30 in the evening, when the convoy, consisting of a motorcycle outrider, 2 cars, a Crossley tender and an armoured car, were halted by a barricade on this road.
Emmett Dalton had been a young man of 17 years of age who joined the British Army, the Royal Dublin Fusiliers, in 1915 or 1916, and was immediately sent out to the Somme. The Somme battles began in June of that year and continued for many months, and he went out in September and was a very gallant young soldier. And before he was 20, had won a military cross for his acts of heroism. And he was with Michael Collins when Collins was killed.
Well, he and I got out, and some people got off the Crossley tender, and we lined up on a ditch. It gave you cover from the angle from which the firing was coming, which was up there.
Emmett Dalton told me that on the day Collins was killed, Collins was inspecting some of Emmett's military outposts, and they had been to 2 or 3 towns, including Collins's own hometown, and they had several drinks in each of the places. I'm not suggesting that Collins was drunk or that Emmett was drunk, but he did say, yes, we were having a few jars that day.
But he was firing from up there, and I was firing from here.
Was there any conversation going on between all of you who were here?
No.
Were you shouting things like, there they are, or anything like that?
No. There was nothing of that description whatever, except to get on with what we could and shoot. At the time, I felt that there was a little fire coming from up there. You see that hill up there?
Yeah. In those days, you came across people who said, he actually killed Collins. He actually physically shot Collins. I mean, there was always a story that Collins was killed by his own side, which was absolute, sheer, bloody nonsense. Collins was killed by a shot from a British Army rifle. There's not the slightest doubt about that.
At what stage then did you learn that he'd been hit?
Well, I thought I heard a voice calling me. And I jumped up, and at that stage O'Connell had come up the road to me. And he said, "Where's the big fellow?" So I said, "He's round the corner, around the bend." And we both went up there, and he had been shot. He was lying there with a very gaping wound to the back of his head. So I called the armoured car back, and under protection of the armoured car, we bandaged the wound. I bandaged the wound, and O'Connell said an act of contrition to him. I knew he was dying, if not already dead.
I wanted to make a film about the Irish Civil War while there were still people alive who had fought on both sides. I put this idea to RT, and they hummed and hawed and fecked around, and said yes sometime, but first of all, we want you to do a series in studio. And I got rather fed up with this and decided that I would leave RTE if I wasn't allowed, terrible thing to say, if I wasn't allowed to do as I wanted. I was disappointed. I'd been brought up on Irish history. Not only did my father fight in 1916, but he'd spent considerable time in jail for his beliefs. My father went on hunger strike. He remained on hunger strike for 17 days. In my father's case, going on hunger strike achieved his objective. He was released from Mountjoy jail. But he was arrested time and time again. He was in Frongach. He reckoned that he'd been in 5 different jails in his lifetime. That was at my father's funeral. My sister Grania, Patsy, my sister Finn looking suitably mournful, and Dev, of course. I suppose most husbands say about their wives how extraordinary they were. I think that my wife was really quite extraordinary. 51 years of marriage doesn't mean 51 years of absolute peace and tranquility. Like anybody, we had rows. And that united us more than ever. So you are. In 1977, Patsy and myself moved to Limerick. I'd been relations director, the only...
Came into her own.
I was dealing with what he wanted. A fortnight off and do a film for her. We did, I think, about...
Gone now, when murder was rare. But when it did happen, it caused a great breach in society.
Grotesque, unbelievable, bizarre, unprecedented. The tragic story of 2 young lovers in the Dublin of the early 1960s. The execution date was fixed for January the 18th, 1853.
It must have been in those days that murders were a scarcer commodity than they are now, because they were very popular. They really were very popular. It never occurred to me that there was anything wrong with me. But Patsy divined instantly that she suspected it was cancer, and indeed it turned out to be cancer of the esophagus. So I spent some time in hospital. I had some surgery. I haven't the slightest doubt that it was Patsy's care and attention to me during my illness and after my illness that helped restore me to health and happiness.
She fought tooth and nail for Cathal. She was determined Cathal was going to come through it. And he was seriously ill, but she wouldn't take any brush-offs or anything.
The awful thing was that not long afterwards, although my cancer, touch wood, has disappeared now, she got cancer and had treatment for cancer for 2 or 3 years before she died.
You can't win every fight. I mean, some illnesses you can't beat, and that's it. And she coped with that with extraordinary grace.
You know, it's quite remarkable. She died in February 3 years ago. And on St. Valentine's Day, which was the 14th of February, she wrote me a card. To my boyfriend of 56 years, she wrote, "And thank you for everything. Love, Patsy." I had no idea that she was dying, but she knew she was dying. She knew she was dying.
I just opened in Faith Healer at the gate, and it was a very glittery production. We had Ray Fiennes and Ian McDermott in it as well. And Patsy was a great theatre goer, went to everything. And she sent me flowers on the second night, which was so Patsy and so elegant. Because on the first night it's a lot of fuss and, you know, excitement, and you get flowers and you get things like that. And the second night is a bit of a, you know, down night sometimes. And there these flowers arrived, which I still have, and beside me. And they have bloomed since then. And every time I see them, of course, I think of Patsy.
I haven't the slightest doubt that Patsy loved me, as I loved her. Neither of us was the sort of individual to constantly say, I love you. And in fact, I've often thought, you know, now that she's gone, that I'm sorry I didn't say it more often.
He still gets great enjoyment from work and from friends. To see that is great. I mean, I've done some voiceovers with him and things like that, and everyone loves when Cathal comes into the room, and that never changes.
I enjoyed television, I must say. It was great gas. I had some of the greatest gas in television up and down the country. Nowadays, as you well know, television is a much more disciplined thing than it was in my day. It was very slapdash in my day. But we made good programs, I think.
Award to present.
I think RT has been incredibly fortunate that over a period of 40-odd years, they've had somebody of his caliber to mirror our social and political history or other human stories and documentaries that he's done. And I think that's his huge achievement.
And the Japanese literally worked 1/5 of them to death.
I mean, we would be the poorer if you look back at the body of work. If that didn't exist, we would be the poorer.
RTE buys in a lot of programs from Britain and the United States and the continent. They want to personalize them, so I do a voiceover on them. That's about really as much as I do nowadays. 1945 on the Vistula, southeast of Warsaw. I never really thought that I would reach the age of 80 years. I mean, I can remember as a young man thinking, well, if I see the century out, I'll be 72 or 73. But here I am now, 80 years of age. My constant companion nowadays is my cat, Fred. Fred is nearly 21 years of age. He's a very good cat and a very good companion. Yes, Fred's a great old friend. I sometimes think, I want, if when I die, I would meet the people I loved here on earth. I would love to think that that would be so. And I say to myself, well, yes, it is so, because I'd rather believe it so than not so. You're a buckety old cat, aren't you? Yes.
Mr. Pressman, here's some news. You can print it if you choose, just to prove the times have changed a lot. Though it may sound strange to you, it is absolutely true. You can believe it or not.
I have a wish list the size of a very long arm, and I'm hoping some of those wishes come true. Irish music, Irish sports stars, Irish soap stars, Irish politicians to an extent. Having said that, we live in an exciting world. There's nothing wrong with bringing in a splash of exotica, be they actors or international statesmen even. No one knows what's going to happen with the Late Late Show. It's a mystery, and that's part of the excitement. It's like any good whodunit. Who will do it on the Late Late Show? No one knows.
Ryan Tuberty presents the Late Late Show, Friday at 9:35 on RTE1.
Love these. A bit naughty though.
187 calories of naughtiness, actually. These are my best jeans ever. Oh my goodness! Uh-oh. I'll never be able to fit into those.
No.
Maltesers, the lighter way to enjoy chocolate.
Now, you have a 1 in 10 chance of winning one of these great DVDs when you buy any pack of chocolate from our special promotional range.
It's a time for celebration.
Congratulations, graduates.
But they have a secret that just won't die.
Payback's hell.
Sorority Row in cinemas $9.99.
Nature provides, Nescafe captures at its brightest.
For treating head lice, nothing is more effective than Hedrin. Now in an easy-to-use trigger spray too. Don't lose your head. Use your head. Use your Hedrin.
Not supposed to mix whites and colours? With Colour Catcher, watch me. My husband's favourite shirt, my daughter's bear, and my expensive dress. Colour Catcher absorbs the colours that run. The proof is on the sheet. Look.
Colour Catcher. Fewer washes, fewer worries. And for stained clothes, try the 2-in-1 Colour Catcher and Oxy-Stain Removal.
Why do cats smile when dragons breathe fire? Why do bears bore? So think happy thoughts. Thanks, Mom. Till bad ones go by.
Easy Singles. Goodness made easy.
Tipperary Kids Natural Mineral Water. Refreshing all your little champions. Tipperary Kids, part of you.
We're curious. It's in our nature.
1, 2, 1, 2.
We want to know. We like to try things out. Now you can try O2 Broadband for free. Download music, go on Facebook, watch YouTube. Satisfy your curiosity. Try O2 Broadband for free. Borrow a modem at your local O2 store. Together is better. O2.
Good evening. The European Central Bank has issued a written opinion on NAMA which broadly approves the scheme but highlights concerns about the price the agency will pay for banks' assets. The ECB says the measures in the draft NAMA legislation should restore confidence in the Irish banking system, but it goes on to say the price of whatever assets are acquired should be determined by market conditions. The Minister for Finance, Brian Lenihan, insisted to an Oireachtas committee that NAMA would not compensate developers or bankers who have made bad decisions. An interim examiner has been appointed to Smart Telecom. The High Court heard that the telecom company has debts in excess of €101 million. The company, with 57 employees, has 13,000 residential customers and 500 business clients. The Labour leader Eamon Gilmore has warned that complacency will be the greatest obstacle for those campaigning in favour of the Lisbon Treaty. Launching the party's campaign in support of the referendum, Mr Gilmore said there was a real danger that the treaty could be defeated again. He said a yes vote would help restore international confidence in Ireland and help to secure jobs and investment. Meanwhile, the trade union Unite has called for a no vote in the referendum. Jimmy Kelly, Unite's Irish regional secretary, claimed that rejection of the Lisbon Treaty could force the government to give unions greater recognition. Gardaí have launched an investigation after a 28-year-old truck driver was killed in a workplace accident in County Clare. It happened when the father of two fell from an articulated lorry in the Milltown Malbay area. Gardaí and Ennistimon are investigating the incident. The Health and Safety Authority has also been notified. And those are the headlines. A very good evening.
Still unmistakably Avonmore, now with a cool new look.